Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk Physical Media. I'm your host, John, and we're going to start the show off like we do every single week with the news, and it was a very slow news week in the world of physical media. The only thing that got announced was Seven Samurai is getting a 4K restoration that you'll be able to check out on the big screen on July 5th, so it should get a 4K Blu-ray release later this year, most likely from the Criterion Collection in the United States, and that's pretty damn awesome. Seven Samurai is one of the greatest films of all time. It's Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece, his magnum opus. It has a United States remake called The Magnificent Seven, which is a classic in its own right. And I can't wait to see that on 4K Blu-ray, because I was just talking about last week, actually, that, it looks pretty rough, so I can't wait to see how they clean that one up. And then Warner Brothers announced some catalog titles. They announced Game Night and Just Mercy are going to be coming to 4K Blu-ray. That's pretty cool. It's a little strange, and it looks like they're not going to have slipcovers on it, so it just looks like they're just, putting out these 4K Blu-rays just to put them out there kind of deal. It doesn't look like they're anything special, but hey, I really do want to grab Game Night on 4K Blu-ray. I think that was really one of the last comedies that was released on the big screen that was absolutely hysterical. Rachel McAdams and Jason Bateman have great chemistry in that movie, and I just always think of Rachel McAdams doing the Pulp Fiction scene in that movie. I think it's absolutely hysterical.
Any of you fucking pricks move and I'll execute every motherfucking last one of you!
And I'm glad that that's going to be getting a 4K Blu-ray release. And then we also got some announcements that were a little bit strange. So Red Eye and Double Jeopardy, which were both Paramount's Presents releases that came out last year, they're going to be getting re-released this year just as standard Paramount releases. Now, I didn't look too far into this. I don't know if they're going to have all of the extras that the Paramount Presents line has. I assume it'll be cheaper. So it's a little bit strange that they're going this route. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen them do that. I've seen them do the reverse of this a couple times where something was released normally and then gets a Paramount Presents release. I still have no idea. I thought I had Paramount figured out, but I really don't. They're always just throwing curveballs at you. I thought that I had them figured out with how they do their Paramount Presents line, but I guess that's just their boutique label line, and maybe they just have limited runs, then eventually they just ended up on standard. I'm not entirely too sure about that. So those are some pretty strange announcements. And then another announcement that I'm actually really excited about is in September, where you're going to get a 4K Blu-ray release of Sweeney Todd. This is the Tim Burton directed, Johnny Depp starring, you've heard about that before, and this is a great musical. I'm not a big musical fan, but I'm very excited that this is going to be getting a solo standard 4K Blu-ray release, because this did come out last year in a box set. It was actually a surprise announcement that was kind of released with all these other movies that had already been released. So it was a really cool thing that they were doing, and this is what you should do with all of the box sets that have these collections of films. I talk about Sony, what they do with the Columbia Classics collection, or what they do with their Sony's Pictures Classics 30th Anniversary collection, where you have to buy the entire collection to get all of those films. Every once in a while, they'll throw you one out there, and they'll give you, Taxi Drivers coming to 4K Blu-ray this year. We also already have gotten Lawrence of Arabia on 4K Steelbook, Gandhi, so some of them get released on their own, but a lot of them you have to buy the entire collection, and that bothers a lot of people, including myself, because, maybe I don't want to spend all that money for movies I'm never going to watch. Personally, I always just like to own movies that I am going to rewatch. That's the purpose of having my physical media collection. Yeah, sometimes I'm probably never going to revisit some of these, and I really like the box art or something. I'll hold on to it forever. That's how I feel about my Dark Knight trilogy of Blu-rays. I really like those boxes, so I'm going to still hold on to that probably forever, unless I really feel like I don't want to. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. I love what they did with the Dark Knight trilogy on just regular standard Blu-ray, so I'll hold on to that forever. So I'm really glad that they are actually going to give Sweeney Todd its own solo release, so at least everybody, including myself, who didn't buy that box set from last year, because there was no reason for me to buy it, because I owned every other movie in there except for Sweeney Todd, so now I'll finally own Sweeney Todd on 4K Blu-ray. And like I was saying, not a big musical fan, but I really enjoy Sweeney Todd, so this is one I'll definitely be picking up on 4K Blu-ray, and then I'll finally get a review out for it. But really, that was it as far as news goes. It was a very slow news week, which is to be expected. We've had big boutique label announcements the last few weeks. My wallet's already getting really upset about July and August. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to make it work. We're going to make it happen, because there's some great 4K Blu-rays coming out in June and July and August, so I'm really excited about that. And since it was a slow news week, that means we're going to get right into the Q&A portion of this week's show. I'm going to start it off with our channel director, Frank from Frank's Media and Reviews, my co-host of Collector's Corner. And Frank said, what 4K Blu-ray releases are you looking forward to in June? Well, number one, top of my list is Chinatown. That is a top 5 favorite film for me of all time. So it's really close to The Terminator. You know how much I love The Terminator and how much I'm looking forward to The Terminator on 4K Blu-ray. Chinatown's right on its tails. That is an absolute masterpiece directed by Roman Polanski, starring Jack Nicholson in what I think is his best role. So that comes out actually this Tuesday from Paramount Presents, and I can't wait to check that one out. That's number one. And this week we're also getting Bound on 4K Blu-ray. This is what the Wachowskis did before The Matrix. Cannot wait to check that one out on 4K Blu-ray. American Gigolo is coming out, and then the last week of June we're going to be getting Purple Rain, which is an 80s classic. You know, it's not the greatest film ever, but if you love the album Purple Rain and you watch Purple Rain as like a very long music video, then you were so excited that Purple Rain is going to be coming to 4K Blu-ray. That same day, we're also getting Blue Velvet, which is one of David Lynch's masterpieces. Now, it's not my favorite David Lynch film, but it's a lot of people's favorite, so I know they're really excited about that, and I'm really excited too. So June, it's been a very packed month. I'm very behind on 4K Blu-ray reviews. I just don't have the time, and man, we're getting spoiled with 4K Blu-rays, but so that's a good question. And he also said, what's your favorite psychological thriller movie? Well, I'm probably going to go with The Sixth Sense on this one. A lot of people label that as a horror movie, which is weird because it's definitely more of a thriller, and it's a psychological thriller at that. I mean, the tension that builds, and Anthony Hopkins in this movie, he definitely deserved Best Actor for this performance. It is phenomenal. Jodie Foster definitely deserved her Academy Award as well. I mean, it's just one of the best movies of the 1990s. Every time I rewatch The Silence of the Lambs, I'm always like surprised at how good it is, and that's the sign of a great film. When you look at it and you're just like, and it's like the 100th time you watched it, and you're like, I cannot believe that this movie is this good. David Fincher loves to make psychological thrillers as well. Zodiac is a fantastic movie. I actually heard that is going to be getting a 4K Blu-ray release pretty soon. You can actually watch it on 4K digital right now, which is very strange, and they didn't really announce that, so I don't know if that's like a, you know, maybe they're just running it through the system on 4K Blu-ray, well, not on 4K Blu-ray, just on 4K. I don't know exactly how that works. It's weird that they would release a new scan with no new announcement about that new scan. I have seen people say it looks pretty cool, but still. Anyway, it's a great psychological thriller, so if you've never seen Zodiac, check out Zodiac, and then, of course, if you haven't seen The Silence of the Lambs, check out The Silence of the Lambs. And the last question is, what's one show that has been canceled that you wish would return for one more season? Oh man, this is really tough because I don't actually get to watch that many TV shows anymore, and I never really got to experience like a show getting canceled on me. Everyone always talks about Freaks and Geeks. That's always the big one. I wish I would have got more seasons, but I didn't come to Freaks and Geeks until well after it was canceled, so I only saw it as a one-season show. Prison Break was one that when it got canceled, I was disappointed, but then when looking back on it in hindsight, you're like, how many times can you escape from prison, get caught, escape from prison again? The show had to end. It had a great first 2 seasons, but I'm actually going to go with 2 shows here. One, I don't think they ever announced that it was going to ever even have a second season or had any intention of having a second season, but Watchmen on HBO, that I always wanted a second season to. Even though I think they ended the first season perfectly, I just think that a second season could be fun because I think they did such a great job with the first season. And another one is Lovecraft Country. This only got 1 season on HBO, and I don't know what happened. I always thought that it was going to have a second season. I thought the first season was phenomenal, but I guess not a lot of people were watching that. So Lovecraft Country, and if we ever could get Watchmen. But, you know, I'm not a huge TV watcher, mainly because I invest all my time in the movies. So unfortunately, you know, I don't get to watch as much shows, so I haven't really had to experience that heartbreaking loss of a show being canceled. Faith has experienced that numerous times. I know How I Met Your Father, like, killed her when that got canceled because they didn't give you the ending. And anytime a show doesn't give you the ending, that's really upsetting. And even for, like, if it's 5 people watching it, you know, you gotta at least give them the conclusion that they want. You know, they invested their time. I mean, just throw out the little bit of money and give them the conclusion. At least send them home happy. It's always upsetting when shows like Firefly get canceled and, you know, people who were in love with that show now have to never have that show again, and they never even get, well, except they did actually get a good concluding chapter, but, you know, for the most part, not everybody gets to experience that. They just gotta build it up in their mind, and unfortunately, live with that disappointment. So those are great questions, Frank. Thank you so much, buddy. I really do appreciate it. And the next one is from Sprazy110. He wrote, what's your favorite kind of special features? Making of documentary, audio commentary, deleted scenes, outtakes, or anything else? Well, for me, it's always going to be the making of documentary. That's the thing. That's my coup de grace. If you could put a making of documentary on there, I'm as happy as a clam. I don't know why a clam is happy, but I'm as happy as it. Because a making of documentary, I would actually spend money on a making of documentary. I just love watching people's passion for filmmaking. You know, I love film. I love all the behind the scenes stuff. I love just hearing producers and directors and actors just talk about it, cinematographers, you know, how they felt making the movie. And I love that. Whenever a documentary comes out, it's totally, like, I would pay money to go watch a really good making of documentary. A lot of times they'll just include them on the discs, which is crazy. Apocalypse Now has one of the greatest making of documentaries, Heart of Darkness, of all time, and they just throw it on there. Same thing with Blade Runner. That has a great making of documentary. It's like 4 hours long. They just throw it on there. The Frighteners on 4K Blu-ray. Yes, that comes under German release from Turbine Studios, but that has one of the greatest making of documentaries of all time. So I'll always be happy with a making of documentary. And believe it or not, I'm not the biggest audio commentary guy. Every once in a while, I will watch an audio commentary track. You know, sometimes if I really want to do the extra research for it, I'll listen to it. But you know, for the most part, I'm not a big audio commentary guy. It really has to be something that really catches my eye, like the Kevin Smith audio commentary for Roadhouse. I had to hear that. Big Kevin Smith guy. But still, I don't always go in for the audio commentary. Trailers, you can just take them, because in the world of YouTube, I can watch whatever trailer I want. And honestly, I avoid trailers for new movies at all costs. I try not to watch them unless, you know, I really can't avoid them. And sometimes you can't avoid them. I love outtakes. That's another one. And not everyone will include outtakes. I don't know why. I just always think it's funny to watch, you know, actors break. I've always appreciated that. So I always enjoy good outtakes. Do you guys remember when Pixar used to do outtakes at the end of their movies? I think they stopped after like Toy Story 2.
Marker.
But that was really funny. And deleted scenes, I don't actually like deleted scenes. That might be another one that surprises you guys. Deleted scenes for me, I always just feel like they're deleted for a reason. And I don't like to have to like try and re-edit the film in my mind and try and figure out where those deleted scenes would go. Yes, it might add some context, but I like to watch the film as it's presented to me. If they ever come out with a director's cut and they include those deleted scenes, that's a different scenario, but I'd actually never go in and look at the deleted scenes. That's not something I really care about. So for me, it's always going to be the making of documentary. That was a great question, Sprazy110. I appreciate that, buddy. And the next one is from Nick Chang, and he wrote, who are your top 10 favorite directors of all time? And at number 1, he has Steven Spielberg. At number 2, he has Akira Kurosawa. At number 3, he has Ridley Scott. Number 4, Alfred Hitchcock. Number 5, Stanley Kubrick. 6, James Cameron. Number 7, Christopher Nolan. Number 8, the Coen brothers. Number 9, Quentin Tarantino. And number 10, Brian De Palma. That is a great top 10 list, and the Coen brothers unfortunately didn't make mine, and that was a really tough cut because I absolutely love the Coen brothers. It's really hard to make a top 10 list, and I attempted to, but this, you know, it could change any time, like any top 10 list. It's really hard, and I did my best. And at number 10, you know, I gotta put James Cameron on there. At the end of the day, this is the same guy who gave us Terminator, my favorite film of all time. He gave us Aliens, which is a phenomenal film in its own right. He gave us Terminator 2, The Abyss. I love all of these movies. True Lies is fantastic. Titanic is fantastic. I just don't like the Avatar movies. They're movies that are just not for me. And that's all he's done since 1997 is 2 Avatar movies. So if he had stopped after Titanic, would he be higher? Maybe, because now I don't have the Avatar films that I have to, like, you know, throw into the pudding or anything like that. So unfortunately, got to put Big Jim at number 10, despite the fact that I love him. At number 9, Christopher Nolan, another director who I absolutely love, but you know, in hindsight, he is not my favorite, and I kind of cooled off on a lot of his films. So if you would have asked me this question 5 years ago, 100% Christopher Nolan is in my top 3, but I've kind of cooled off a little bit on The Dark Knight. As much as I love Memento, and as much as I love movies like The Prestige, or Batman Begins, or Interstellar, which I think is a masterpiece, Inception is fantastic. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of Tenet. The Dark Knight Rises, like, you know, 50-50 on that one, and then Dunkirk still doesn't work for me. So as much as I love him, and I appreciate him, and I respect him, I mean, Oppenheimer is his best film, and that just came out last year. So that means that the guy pretty much is firing on all cylinders right now, and you just put out your best film last year, so he could rise back up. Number 8, Stanley Kubrick. This guy is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, if not the greatest filmmaker of all time. This is a guy who gave us A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Paths of Glory, which is a fantastic film. I mean, 2001: A Space Odyssey is widely considered the greatest sci-fi film of all time, if not the greatest film of all time. His last film came out the year he died, called Eyes Wide Shut, which is a fantastic movie, so he just went out right on top. So Stanley Kubrick is a great director. He's so good that they think he faked the moon landing. Then at number 7, I got David Fincher. I love David Fincher. For me, the only movie that's not good, and it's still an acceptable film. Like, for most directors, you'd be like, all right, it's all right. And that film is Alien 3, and he hates that movie. But every movie he did after Alien 3 has been amazing. Starting with Seven, which I think is his best film. Follows that up with The Game, which is a really good thriller. Brings out Fight Club. Then he does Panic Room, another great thriller. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which I finally came back around on. We were just talking about Zodiac. Even last year, I loved Killer. I thought that movie was great. Michael Fassbender gives a great performance in that movie. And then, of course, The Social Network. I even like Mank, so I really love David Fincher. At number 6, Guillermo del Toro. This guy hasn't missed in years. The only one of his movies I really don't like is Pacific Rim. And it's just because it's not my kind of movie. It's still a well-made movie, but the last movies that this guy have made have been Crimson Peak, The Shape of Water, Nightmare Alley, and then Pinocchio. Masterpiece after masterpiece. So many people love the Hellboy movies. They've been asking for Hellboy 3 because they love Hellboy 1 and Hellboy 2. Some people think Blade 2 is better than the first Blade. I don't think so, but I still love Blade 1. Mimic is a great movie. Kronos, his first movie right out of the gate, is fantastic. And then how could we forget his best movie that he ever made, Pan's Labyrinth, which is probably one of the greatest fantasy films of all time, and it's a fantasy horror film. The Devil's Backbone. Guillermo del Toro is great. Number 5, and let's just remember, guys, this is favorite, not necessarily the best directors, but many people might expect Ridley Scott here, but no, I'm going to pick his brother, Tony Scott. I love Tony Scott movies. Some people might say they're guilty pleasures, but I don't care. Days of Thunder is one of my favorite films of all time. That is my favorite Tom Cruise movie. This is the same guy who directed Top Gun. They say that Days of Thunder is Top Gun on wheels. They're both great movies. I love The Last Boy Scout. And then he also directed True Romance, which is one of my favorite films of all time as well. So, this guy gave us so many great films that, for me, they really check a lot of boxes for me personally. So that's why I always enjoy a good Tony Scott movie. Enemy of the State. Tony Scott's also an auteur. Like, he has a very distinct style. When it's a Tony Scott movie, it feels very fast-paced. That's why I thought that when Tony Scott got together with Quentin Tarantino and he directed True Romance, it was a match made in heaven. And that's why I love Tony Scott films. At number 4, I got Steven Spielberg. And for a lot of people, this might seem a little low, but Steven Spielberg is one of the greatest directors of all time. I don't fault anyone for having him at number 1. It's really hard for me not to even put him higher than number 4 because Steven Spielberg really is one of the greatest directors of all time. This is the guy who started it off with Sugarland Express, which is a movie I still haven't seen. Then he eventually, did Jaws, which is considered one of the greatest films of all time. A lot of people I know, it's their favorite film of all time, including Shamrock Balls. And if you guys know Shamrock Balls, aka David, and you saw our episode of the top 5 film scores of all time, we were talking about Jaws. That's his number 1. Well, that and number 2. But the first one was directed by Steven Spielberg, and John Williams was right by Steven Spielberg's side. They pretty much still work together. John Williams is still working. Steven Spielberg is still working. Steven Spielberg is the guy. Not only did he give us Jaws and E.T., which is my favorite of his films, the guy gave us Jurassic Park the same year he gave us Schindler's List. And 3 times, I believe, it might even be 4, he put out multiple movies in 1 year. That should just tell you how much passion Steven Spielberg has for film. He also made Amblin Entertainment, which produced how many other great films. It's also believed that he at least co-directed Poltergeist. He definitely helped out in the casting and produced that movie. Steven Spielberg is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I can go on and on and on about the movies that this guy made. Even like a down decade is a decade where he puts out like Minority Report, Catch Me If You Can, and War of the Worlds. He's just that good. Those would be some directors' greatest films, and they would kill to just direct one of those. But he's Steven Spielberg, and he is one of the greatest directors of all time. So at number 3, then, I have Spike Lee. Spike Lee has directed Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X, which are both fantastic 10 out of 10 5-star films. 2 of my favorite films of all time. Malcolm X, I actually think, is the greatest biographical film of all time. That is Denzel Washington's best performance. Do the Right Thing is a movie I have to watch every single summer, and everybody should see that movie. But if you take those movies out of the equation, he also directed Inside Man, which is one of the best heist movies of all time. He also directed The 25th Hour, which stars Edward Norton, which, God, it's such a good movie from the early 2000s. He directed Clockers, which is an underrated masterpiece. His most recent films, The Five Bloods and Black Klansman, were both critically acclaimed, and I enjoyed them both. They both had great leading performance. They just had a great ensemble cast in The Five Bloods. My God. Chadwick Boseman gives one of his great last performances in that movie, all directed by one of the greatest directors of all time, in Spike Lee. That means at number 2, I have Martin Scorsese. Now, why is Martin Scorsese at number 2 and not at number 1? He was at number 1 for a long time for me, but You know, I gotta be honest with myself. As much as I love Martin Scorsese, I mean, he is my second favorite director of all time. He's directed movies like Goodfellas, which I think is one of the greatest films of all time. And then a lot of people compare that movie to Casino, which came out in 1995. I think that movie's almost as good as Goodfellas. Then you get The Color of Money in the 1980s, same decade as After Hours. In the 1970s, he made Mean Streets and Taxi Driver. Also in the 2000s and 2010s, this guy gave us Hugo, The Wolf of Wall Street. His last two movies, Killers of the Flower Moon and The Irishman, have both been just widely acclaimed, and they are phenomenally directed. And this guy's still doing it into his 80s. He's going to die in a film set because he's never going to stop making movies. And Martin Scorsese has to be number 2 because he has put out so many classic after classic. We didn't even bring up Raging Bull, which is a phenomenally directed film. Even though it's a tough rewatch, you can't argue with how good that movie is. So who's at number 1 then? Well, for me, it's going to be Quentin Tarantino. And I give Quentin Tarantino a lot of credit for me being a fan of film. Without Quentin Tarantino, I probably wouldn't love movies the way I love them. Because before I ever saw Pulp Fiction, I loved movies. Movies have always been a passion of mine. But I didn't like, pop the hood on movies yet. I really didn't deep dive into it. But I saw Pulp Fiction. I saw that non-linear storytelling. And movies got their hook in me. This is where I really started to care about making of documentaries and how films are actually made. This guy gave us Reservoir Dogs. He sold the scripts for Natural Born Killers and True Romance. Gave us Jackie Brown. So his first 3 movies are Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Jackie Brown. Guy says he only wants to make 10 movies. He could have retired after 3. Then he decides, you know what? I'll do 2 movies. I'll do them back to back. Originally supposed to be 1 movie, but they wanted them to make them shorter. So we get back-to-back years. Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2. Then we get Death Proof, which, he wanted to team up with his buddy Robert Rodriguez, pay homage to Grindhouse films. He made Planet Terror. Tarantino decided to make Death Proof. Death Proof's alright. I think that's his worst film. Then he made Inglourious Bastards. I'm not the biggest Inglourious Bastards guy, but still a fantastic film. Then we also get Django Unchained, The Hateful Eight, and then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Really, a return back to form. That movie is a masterpiece. Every time I rewatch that movie, I fall in love with it more and more and more. And I can go on and on about Quentin Tarantino, but I won't because that was a great question. Those are my top 10 favorite directors of all time. You guys could let me know in the comment section who are your top 10 favorite directors of all time. Thanks for that question, Nick. And the next question is from Matt, and he said, can you rank these comedies? You guys can see those comedies, so I'm going to start at number 11, and that is Starsky and Hutch. Now, I actually like Starsky and Hutch. I remember this movie very, very well. I actually had this on DVD. I used to watch it a lot, but I don't think it's aged that well. I didn't laugh as much as I used to at this one. And then number 10 is I Love You, Man. This was a Paul Rudd, Jason Segel movie, and this movie is actually really funny as well, but I always just think of the one scene in the gym where he's like, give it everything you got! Give it everything you got! And, a movie's got to be at number 10. And number 9, Role Models. And Role Models is also a really funny movie. Again, stars Paul Rudd, but this time teaming up with Sean William Scott. It has McLovin in it. This movie is just a really funny movie. It was so underrated when it came out to the point that I actually didn't see it right away. Finally caught up to it. And man, I put this like with the other guys as a very underrated comedy film. And number 8, Knocked Up. And Knocked Up is a movie very similar to Superbad. I remember the year 2007. I remember going to the movies. I saw Knocked Up, and I thought this was hysterical. This is really like when Seth Rogen was like on the rise. We had seen him in small other parts like the 40-Year-Old Virgin, but this was him in the starring role. Harold Ramis actually plays Seth Rogen's dad in that movie. And it's, it's really good, but it's got to be at number 8. Number 7, this is actually hard to put at number 7, but Forgetting Sarah Marshall, starring Jason Segel. The Judd Apatow years are very underrated as far as comedy goes. I think a lot of people knock them now, but if you had to be there, because they were just hit after hit, and Forgetting Sarah Marshall was one of the best ones. I absolutely love this one as well. Jason Segel was actually perfect in the leading role. Mila Kunis was so funny in this as well, really showing that she was more than just a TV actress. And Hawaii never looked so good. I don't think I'll ever go, but it looks beautiful. Number 6, Superbad. And Superbad is one of those movies that just always reminds me of high school. Jonah Hill and Michael Cera had great chemistry in this movie, but what always stands out to me is Bill Hader and Seth Rogen as the cops.
Man, he's wielding something. He hits the small gentleman in the slacks.
I could have just watched the whole movie as them. For me, they are the standout performances. I'm always quoting them. I'm never really quoting Jonah Hill too much, but the whole movie is still great. At number 5, Step Brothers. Now, this would be way higher if it wasn't for the Catalina wine mixer scene at the very end. That's the only thing that really kind of drags it down. I'm not really too into the whole singing scene that they have. Everything kind of before it is still really good, and then everything after is still really good when, like, him and his brother are trying to hug. But this movie is just so endlessly quotable. John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell really do have great chemistry after Talladega Nights. People were psyched in 2008 to check this one out. And it lived up to it. I saw this multiple times in theaters that summer, and I had a blast each and every time. It's just that goddamn Catalina wine mixer, man. And then number 4 is going to be Wedding Crashers. This is another one that you had to be there. This movie was so funny. Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson, they were a thing back then. They kind of had them and a couple other guys. Ben Stiller, they kind of had like this group of people. Will Ferrell, who always worked together. Like Will Ferrell pops up for a really hysterical cameo in this movie.
Idiot! Oh, what a loser! Good!
But Vince Vaughn is the standout performance. This is like Vince Vaughn at the peak of his powers. He is so funny. When he comes down the one morning and Owen Wilson asks him how his night was, and he's like, "Are you referring to the 12 o'clock rape or the 4 o'clock gay art show?" Like, that is one of the best lines in film history. And he's like, I'm upset with you, so I'm going to sit over here alone and regroup. Vince Vaughn, he's so good in that movie. And number 3, I got Pineapple Express. This is probably my favorite stoner comedy of all time. James Franco, Seth Rogen, they have great chemistry in this movie. But this is where I learned to love Danny McBride, the guy who would star in Eastbound and Down, This Is the End, who also gave us, he co-wrote the most recent Halloween trilogy, so we can thank him for Halloween 28 and Halloween Kills, and we can also thank him for Halloween Ends if you're into that. And I'm a little upset with Danny about that still, but still, Pineapple Express, endlessly quotable as well. Rosie Perez pops up in this movie. I think this movie is so funny. My wife Faith absolutely loves Pineapple Express. She watches it numerous times a year. At number 2, I got Old School, and this is another one like Will Ferrell. Like, this came out, I believe, the same year as Elf. So we get the raunchy comedy and we get the kids comedy. Both of them are considered classics to this very day. But Old School is still one of his best movies. I mean, we get Frank the Tank. One of my favorite scenes is when he's in the car, he's driving, he's calling up his wife, and he's like, "It's Frank. Hey, it's Frank. Ricard, I was just wondering if maybe we can get together and like maybe get a frozen yogurt or maybe perhaps a full meal." Like, this is, he's calling his wife, or like when he's fixing the car and he's like, "Just took the restrictor plate out of the red Jag and not exactly street legal. Got to keep that in the down low." Like, Old School is fantastic. And then number 1, another Will Ferrell comedy, probably his greatest comedy of all time, Anchorman. This is getting a 4K Blu-ray release on July 2nd. I'm excited for this. I can't wait. I can always rewatch Anchorman. I already watched it once this year. I'll have no problem watching it twice. And this one, it's like a disease, because I remember when I saw this in theaters, I didn't love the movie, but then you rewatch it and you start quoting it with your buddies, and then that's it. All of a sudden, you're talking about diversity being an old wooden ship from the Civil War era. So definitely Anchorman is at number 1. That was a great question too. Thank you so much. And the next question is from Lorenzo Harris, man of God, and he said, "What are your top 5 favorite Adam Sandler movies?" And I made a list for this, as well as I like to do with a lot of things. And at number 5, we'll put one drama. So believe it or not, it's not Uncut Gems, even though I think that is a great Safdie Brothers movie. But I'm going to go with the movie he did with Paul Thomas Anderson in the early 2000s, Punch Drunk Love. This actually really does capitalize on like that hothead Adam Sandler that we knew from all of his comedy movies. And I think they leaned into it and put a nice dramatic twist on it. This isn't one of my personal favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movies, but Adam Sandler is great in it. Number 4 is 50 First Dates. This I remember seeing for one of my birthdays one year. Me and Matt went and saw it. It's just so funny. And I'm not the biggest Drew Barrymore fan, as you'll see in another question, but I still thought this movie was so good. Every day he's got to basically reintroduce himself to the girl he ends up falling in love with. Get good Rob Schneider performance in here. This isn't the first time they worked together, him and Drew Barrymore. This would be the second of, I believe, 3 times, and maybe we'll talk about another one. And number 3, you got Billy Madison. This movie came out the same year as Happy Gilmore, and I think people go back and forth on which one is better. A lot of us who were around for this still quote Billy Madison to this very day. You got a great Chris Farley performance in here.
"I'll turn this damn bus around. That'll end your precious little field trip."
Some of the best lines in the movie come from like when he's talking to his dad, he lifts up his shirt, he's like, actually this shirt's Frank's. He just says Frank on it. He's like, "Damn it, Billy!" Or his second grade spelling bee. You remember? Rock, R-O-K. Yeah, so R-O-C-K! And he's like, the sea is silent. Billy Madison is a classic. And number 2, I actually got Happy Gilmore. This is one that I rewatch all the time. And, you know, I think this one just has a little bit more heart than Billy Madison. That's why I put Happy Gilmore above Billy Madison, even though Billy Madison might be slightly funnier. But I just think Happy Gilmore is a little bit more entertaining. It's a little bit more heartwarming. And we also get Shooter McGavin. And who doesn't love Shooter McGavin? That means at number 1, I actually have The Wedding Singer. So, of course, me being the 80s fan that I am, why wouldn't I love a movie that came out in 2000 that takes place in the 1980s? I mean, he's a wedding singer. And it has some of my favorite lines in that movie are, you know, he's losing his mind. And I'm reaping the benefits. And then, of course, oh, I'm the one with the microphone, so you're going to listen to everything that I have to say. Or, you know, hey, why don't you go get drunk and, you know, drive home? It's so good, The Wedding Singer. That was a great question, Lorenzo. Thank you so much, buddy. Next one's from Mr. Smelly Potato, and he says, rank these actresses. And I, of course, made a list for this. We'll start at number 8. Andie MacDowell. I'm not the biggest Andie MacDowell fan, to be flat out honest. Other than Groundhog Day, not the biggest fan of her. She's usually acceptable, but I'm not the biggest fan of Andie MacDowell. Number 7, Drew Barrymore. Now, the reason why she is a little bit higher than Andie MacDowell is she was in 50 First Dates, and she was in The Wedding Singer. And then, of course, when she was a child, she was in E.T., so she gets a slight edge over Andie MacDowell. Number 6, Jennifer Aniston. I do not think Jennifer Aniston is the greatest actress, but I really got to commend her for always being in these comedies and always being game to do stuff. She is actually pretty damn funny. I don't think she's a great actress, though. Let me just be clear. I feel like she's kind of got one gear in her. But she seems to be always game to do stuff, and I really do appreciate that about her. Seems like a very down-to-earth type of person, despite the fact that she's probably on one of the most famous TV shows of all time. So she doesn't have to work like she does, and I still really appreciate that. I also kind of appreciate her friendship with Adam Sandler. Seems genuine, and I just kind of find some warmth in that. At number 5, Meg Ryan. I mean, Meg Ryan, my favorite movie from her is When Harry Met Sally. I also really enjoy Sleepless in Seattle. And then other than that, Top Gun. Who doesn't love Top Gun?
Hey, Goose, you big stud!
That's me, honey.
Take me to bed or lose me forever.
Believe it or not the biggest You've Got Mail fan. It's not one of my favorite movies. I think they were better in Sleepless in Seattle. And then she's also, like I was just saying, Top Gun. She's really good in Top Gun. And at number 4, Julia Roberts. I mean, Pretty Woman is a great movie. It's a classic. And then she's great in the Ocean's movies. Well, she's only in 11 and 12. Erin Brockovich. Then you go all the way back to Steel Magnolias, Mystic Pizza. I mean, Julia Roberts, she was at one point the most famous actress in the world, but I've just never been fully in love with her. But when she's on, she's on. Number 3, Sandra Bullock. And I've been in a Sandra Bullock mood because I just watched her best film, 1994 Speed, yesterday. I had a blast rewatching Speed, as I do every single year. Speed is one of those essential summer movies that you have to watch, directed by John DeBont, who directed Twister. And we get in the sequel to that. Hopefully it's better than Speed 2, despite the fact I have a warm spot in my heart for Speed 2 Cruise Control, which also features Sandra Bullock. So circling back to her, and Sandra Bullock has just been a consistently good actress since Demolition Man. So you can't deny Sandra Bullock. At number 2, Nicole Kidman. Nicole Kidman has also been very consistent since the early 1990s, and she is actually finally getting her flowers for being the great actress that she is, because she has very rarely missed. She's given critically acclaimed performances in the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s. Still, to this very day, she still gives them. And then, of course, if you go to any AMC theater, you can see her before every single movie starts. So you gotta put Nicole Kidman at number 2. And number 1, you know, Miss might be a little bit biased because she is in 2 of my favorite movies, and that's Gina Davis. And I really just give it to her just purely almost based on the fact she's in Thelma and Louise and A League of Their Own. But, I mean, other than that, how many other great movies has Gina Davis been in? She is a phenomenal actress, and she just, for some reason, just stopped acting. I remember reading a story about this, but I forgot what it said. And yeah, she just really kind of fell out of acting, and it's a shame because she was all over the place in the 1980s and the 1990s. I mean, she's in Howard the Duck, if I'm correct, and I know she was in Earth Girls Are Easy, so at the very start, you know, she's kind of taking the usual female roles. Then she kind of became a very strong female when it comes to her roles, and I really appreciated that. I thought she did a great job, and that's why Gina Davis is number 1. And the next question is from Aaron Click. There have been several 4K titles which have had disc replacement programs because of missing audio, Rosemary's Baby, Titanic. What is causing these missing dialogue issues? Well, I don't know if it's anything in particular other than the fact that it's just when they're getting these discs out, I don't think they're actually checking them enough. That's really what I think it's coming down to. From what I understand, there's only 1 or maybe even only 2 factories in the United States that print 4K Blu-ray. Blu-rays. I'm not entirely sure how they are worldwide, but I know there aren't too many, so they probably rush this stuff out. They probably don't have great quality control, and even when they're testing the disc before they even get sent to get printed, I don't know how good that quality control is. I'm sure stuff slips out that's not supposed to slip out, which could, cause these issues. But then, of course, what happens, I'm sure, and this is probably what most likely happens, when they're printing the discs, there's probably some issues on that end, and then it kind of just repeats itself, and that's why we end up with multiple issues. And speaking of the disc replacement programs, you can actually get your Rocky replacement disc. I was talking to Rico Gomez, where I'm not going to be able to answer your question on this week's show because Faith's not on it, but when Faith is, I'm going to ask her that, and hopefully for next week she'll answer that question. But I was talking to Rico Gomez, and he actually got his Rocky replacement discs, and supposedly they're all good and well. So that's good for everybody who's been waiting for those Rocky replacement discs. I'm still on the fence. Am I going to get the new Rocky 6-pack, or am I just going to buy 5 and 6? I was leaning toward just buying 5 and 6 on Steelbook, but I don't know. I might get the entire thing. It's tough. I don't know what to do. But yeah, I think these issues are just caused by the fact that they're always rushing. I just feel like they're always rushing to get this stuff out. Not enough quality control. You got to pay people to do that. And mistakes happen. And unfortunately, it does seem like it does happen a lot. But I don't know what the percentage of these issues actually is. It just seems like it does happen a lot. It's always unfortunate when you have to go through the whole replacement disc program. At least most of the boutique studios have always been very upfront and honest, and they come right out and tell you about it. And that's what I always appreciate about them, is that great customer care. So at least when they do make a mistake, they're upfront and honest about it. But I just think it's quality control and just rushing. I really think that those are the two main culprits with this. I don't think it's anything more than that. I don't think it's anything facetious. I just think it's, something that's kind of, unfortunately, just slipping through the cracks, mainly because we don't have anything to seal those cracks up at the moment. It's kind of an issue, not just in physical media, just in general at the current moment. So that was a great question as well. And I want to thank everybody who sent in questions for this week's episode of Let's Talk Physical Media. If I didn't answer your question this week, I'll answer your question on next week's episode of Let's Talk Physical Media. And I hope you guys enjoyed this week's show. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn notifications on, share this video if you could. And if you would like, you can help support the channel financially through channel memberships. We have a producers tier where you're going to find John Doe Juggalo, Jason Martin, and Mr. Smelly Potato. We also have a director's tier where you're going to find Frank from Frank's Media and Reviews. Make sure you guys head over to John Doe Juggalo and Frank's YouTube channels. Give them a subscribe. But if you got no money to throw away, guys, don't you worry about it. We just hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did, don't forget to get out in those streets, tell your friends about us, and then we'll be seeing you around.